Effort and effectiveness are not the same thing. Just because it didn't go well does not mean you didn't work hard. It does not mean that you didn't do everything you knew how to do, right? Nobody, least of all us, is questioning your work ethic or how much you wanted it, right? Because that's the other thing we'll hear is like, well, if you wanted it bad enough, you would have been successful, blah, blah, blah. That's not always the case.
Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tonya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how.
All right, this is Tonya and Gwen back on the mic after a bit of a break. Episode 77, which drops on January 20th, and we're going to go in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Sometimes you can follow the plan exactly to a T. Stay consistent, do all the right things, and get absolutely no traction. When this happens, most CEOs, even me on occasion, start spiraling, right? Wondering what they missed, whether the whole strategy was flawed from the start. Today, we're going to talk about what's actually happening in that gap between effort and results and how to diagnose the problem without burning everything to the ground. Gwen's here. As always, would it even be a show without Gwen? She is going to help us break this apart in that practical, grounded way that she is known for. And I'm going to share all the ridiculous experiences I've had over the year that make you laugh. So let's get into it. Gwen, here is what I have found over the years. And tell me if you've had similar experiences, different experiences. You know, we as CEOs love a good plan. I think most of us, I mean, there's the impulsive folks, but all of us love a great plan. And unfortunately, not every great plan has great results. And I feel like the first thing that happens is we start questioning ourselves and our work ethic, right? It's like, but I work so hard, but I didn't sleep for 3 weeks. But I can't work any harder than I already did. What more do you want of me? So can you walk us through, in your experience, why even when you actually do everything right, sometimes things just flop?
Well, so I don't know any entrepreneur that hasn't experienced this. I mean, I experience it also multiple times in a year, sometimes multiple times in a month, occasionally multiple times in a week, where you're just like, what? Why? This doesn't make any sense. And I will say one of the best things for that is having someone else to help you talk through it. And that's not really going to your specific question, but it is the thing that I find makes the biggest difference is when we've got someone else that we can actually talk through with it that has enough understanding and care and interest but is bringing a much more objective point of view to it. Because once we get in that spiral, I don't care if it's you, if it's me, I don't care who it is so hard to get out of our own head. And you do this for me, I do this for others.
Yeah, and I'm going to add something to that because I think you're right? The number one thing you've got to do for yourself is you've got to have somebody who can speak truth to that inner critic that is having a field day inside your brain. But the second thing I'm going to add to that, whoever that is, they have to have their own finger on the pulse of the industry and the market, or at the very least, business world, in general. Because, so many times we think, and this is what I hear in my clients, my son who has an MBA, my husband, my girlfriend, my pastor, they're my outside perspective. And the thing is those are all wonderful people, and I'm sure they've got great perspectives. But if they don't have entrepreneurial experience, if they're not out in the world talking to entrepreneurs, they're not going to have their perspective, I would say, is valid, but it's not necessarily useful in these circumstances.
No, absolutely true. You do have to be careful who you're getting it from, and realizing, this is their context is also coloring their questions and their approach to it. But back to having someone help you get out of your head is so important. I think that's, absolutely the first thing, because that voice inside our head, man, it has a lot of practice. It knows how to push every little button for ourselves, right?
Yeah, it really does. I'm wondering, again, like kind of unpacking this idea of even when you do everything right, you're still going to have failure. I think one thing, that we've talked about in the past has been, that mistaking effort for being effectiveness, thinking how much effort you put into something is going to always net a return in the positive.
Well, and this is, I will say this is definitely, I'm going to make kind of an ageist statement, but I'm making an ageist statement about myself, that if you're old enough, that whole work ethic thing was drilled into you. Knowing that, like, it was totally drilled into me, that if you don't work hard, you haven't earned anything. And so that I think that's part, depending on where you are, like I said, in your age, and it's still prevalent, even though I think it's less prevalent, but there's still a fair bit of that. And so I think that we do mentally get caught in, but I worked hard. I worked really hard, and I've been told if I work hard, the results will come. And for some things, that's true, right? There are certain things that you can't magically have, 6-pack abs without ever doing anything. Like you have to, there's work that you have to do to make that happen, if that's the thing that you desire. But not all work will lead to the same result. Right. And I think this is the thing, when we think we've really done the right work, we've put in the effort, and it doesn't, it doesn't net the thing. I mean, I know I've experienced it. Every one of my clients has experienced it. And usually it's because either it wasn't as well aligned as we thought it was. Right. It can be a timing issue. That it actually, this is one that you and I talk about a lot with me, is that often the thing that I'm trying to do is ahead of its time. And so that it's actually a timing issue. If I can just be patient and wait, sometimes a few months and sometimes a few years, everything will click. So sometimes it's a timing issue, but sometimes it's also things either that we didn't take into account that we should have, or that we couldn't take into account because we didn't actually know they existed. And this will be one of those places that I refer once again to, one of my favorite books, which is Thinking in Bets, by Annie Duke. So many times, and even recently, I don't know if I was seeing it on LinkedIn or somewhere else, but I heard the whole thing, life is like a chessboard. And it's like, no, life is not like a chessboard. Annie Duke is right. Life is much more like poker. We can know a certain amount of things, but there's a few things we can't know. And if we don't know them and they show up, we can do all of the right things, but still get a bad result.
Yeah. And that's hard to swallow, because we want to believe that we have more control and influence.
We want it to be a chessboard. We want to be able to say, if I go here, I know what all of the moves are that will happen, right? But it's not that way. Life is not that way. In certain areas there are more than others, but there's always unknown things that happen, and the list is long. We're still coming out of COVID, even though it's 5 years now, we're still coming out of that. So that's, who would have really predicted that? One of the things that we're dealing with now, and all of our clients are saying, is everything feels so, unpredictable, and there's so many unaccounted for, changes. And, we've laughed about the fact that it's like, no, all of this unpredictability was always there. It just was kind of hidden behind a curtain.
Yeah. So, and like touching on that, because I mean, we have a lot of ground to cover. You've done a great job of laying out the pathway for us. But as a strategist, like, I think it's important to address the fact that strategy, the best strategy you can buy, even crap strategy, right? Strategy will always meet some level of unexpected resistance, because most strategy is based in some way on past experience, past performance, right? Like, we create these strategic plans, and what speaks into the strategic plans usually is like, okay, so whatever our goal is, what has worked in the past to get us closest to it, to achieve it, to whatever, okay, what of those things can we do more of? What of those things needs to be done a little bit differently because of the market or
Right.
current events or whatever, right? But we're always creating a strategy. We don't create the strategy really out of a vacuum. We typically take past events, performance, and use that to inform the strategy. And then we're hoping it's like, okay, so if everything, based on what we know of now and what we've seen in the past, if we, mix a little bit of A and a little bit of C and a little bit of D, we think we're going to get this future result.
Right.
And there's always going to be something that zigs when you think it will zag. And so in that vein, Gwen, I think there's 3 places when you're saying, okay, I did everything right, it flopped, or it didn't do what I wanted, what went wrong. I think there's 3 places to look. One is to look at your plan. The second is to look at the environment, which you touched on, COVID being a great example. And then the third is to examine your execution. I think we mistakenly always look at execution. So when you're working with a client and things didn't go as they expected, what are the questions you ask them to help them evaluate the plan?
So it really is starting with those assumptions. What are the things that we are assuming are going to be true, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to remember the title of the book, but I was listening to a book not too long ago that was really focused very much on strategy. And one of the things that he talked about, which I thought was really interesting, is what you said. Most of us develop our strategic plans based on past execution because it's a logical way to go. But his point was that's often the problem, because if what worked before would actually solve the problem we're having now, we wouldn't have a problem now.
Fair.
Right. And so that's the question of like, what assumptions are we making that may or may not actually be true? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we have to get to first in the plan, is to say, so we're assuming ABC. Are all those things actually true? Right. Or are they things that are realistic? Are they things that we can actually, like hang something on to say that this actually makes sense? And I'm going to totally botch the example, but one of the things that they were using was they were talking about that their sales were down, they needed to increase their sales, and everyone's strategy was basically do what we've done before, it'll get us more sales. And his point was, yeah, if that was true, sales wouldn't be down because we're already doing what we've done before. And in the one example that's popping into my mind, it was like, what if we actually looked at a completely different market than what we've historically done? Which also then meant we couldn't assume any of the sales tactics and the activities and whatnot would work, because it was a completely different market, right? Yeah. And so I think the first is always checking the assumptions to say, are the things that we think are happening actually happening, right? In one of my clients recently, they were kind of shifting a business model, and she panicked and kind of shifted back in a way that was not helpful for the new place that she was going. And when we started talking about it, it was like, so is the new business model not working, or is there elements of the business model that are not being worked? And what we realized was there were elements that were not being worked. And so it was like, so let's not assume that this new strategy isn't actually getting the results that we need. Let's just make sure that we're doing all of the pieces that need to be done, and that they're actually getting executed in the way that they need to be executed. And so it's the thing that we do have to deal with all the time is question the assumptions and then start digging into, is that actually the root cause? Or do we go deeper? Or do we go deeper? Or do we go deeper? Right. And what it became pretty obvious was the person that was supposed to be doing certain activities probably wasn't actually doing many of those activities because it was their least favorite thing to do. So so they weren't actually doing all of those activities. And that's where it becomes really, really clear pretty quickly. It's like, oh, okay, so that's a different problem. We need to find someone who's able and willing to do those activities.
Yeah. Okay. So you evaluate the plan. You kind of look at like, what were the assumptions that the plan was built on? I'm somebody who's always going to be looking like, was the plan actually strategic, or was it a bundle of tactics? Because I can't tell you how many people come to me and their big strategy is they're going to live stream for 28 days in a row. And it's like, okay, and what's the purpose of our live stream? Like there's no strategy, right? It's just like, I'm going to live stream. It's like, okay, that's a great tactic, but the strategy is going to tell us what we actually say on our live stream. So what's that? And then they've got nothing. The next is the environment, right? Like, I think it's always important to kind of look at what's going on in the world, even if you're not a big news junkie, and say, okay, what changed that you didn't plan for or you didn't account for? What do you do or advise doing when it comes to looking at the environment when something doesn't go according to plan?
So I think it's good to understand, is the environment actually causing the problem? And, and to look at it in that way, to say, hey, is that actually where the problem is? And at the same point, what I find often is also the case is people get so focused on what's going on in the environment that they're trying to deal with things. It's like, you don't actually know enough about the thing that you're trying to adjust for. So, this is the end of 2025 that we're recording this. And, if you wanted to pick, one or two major topics that were popping up in the news consistently, tariffs would be a big one in 2025 as an example. And because I work with a number of people that deal with physical product, tariffs is a thing, right? It's a real thing. Tariffs not such a big deal if you're doing service, but if you're doing physical product, it's a thing. And what I found was people were trying to make strategic choices about tariffs when there wasn't actually any real information yet about tariffs. And I remember saying to one of my clients, I said, what you actually need to do is stop watching the news. And she kind of went, ha ha ha. And I went, no, I'm serious. I said, because you're worrying about something that you have no way to be able to make any information on until it actually lands in your shop. Because tariffs, as an example, is one of the most complicated calculation things on the planet, right? So unless you're a super expert, and even them, I think, don't really know what, what is going to be the impact on your products. Like, stop worrying about what the impact is going to be on your product. Know that there will be one, and know that you need to deal with it when it hits. But for most of my product-based clients, they started worrying about this in January or February, and very few of them have had much impact until the last couple months of this year. Right? So back to be aware, to say, oh yeah, this is probably going to be impacting my business, but also don't let it be the thing that allows you to spin in such a way that you're not actually doing the work that you need to be doing between here and there.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So when we're looking at then kind of why all the things maybe failed, we look at the plan, we look at what's going on, like you said, current events. I mean, I think tariffs, a great current example. If we were recording this 3-4 years ago, we'd be talking about, the effects of COVID. And then you look at execution. Why do you think it's important to look at execution last versus first?
Because execution is not useful until we actually know how it's being affected by these other things.
You kind of have to know if like the plan you set was built on faulty ground.
Yeah, exactly. Were you building it on rock or are you building it on sand, right? I remember you had an example, and I'll just start it and then I'll let you talk about it, of where they were going to grow their business by some, giant number. And you're like, that's not even possible. Right. So it was a strategy built on something that didn't make sense. You can take it from there. Like I said, I'm totally butchering this example, but I know you know what I'm talking about.
This was a good one though, because this was, a company that had a product and they were looking at, they had a set number of new enrollments they wanted every year. It was like a membership. And so they wanted 100 new enrollments, so above and beyond the renewals each year. And in year 3, they brought me on board because they were like, okay, we need to decide, like either the membership's like not working or something's going on because we keep failing our projections. And I'm like, okay, so, what's the goal? And they were like, it's 100. And I'm like, okay. And so we did, I set out everything, had a strategy, had a plan, and I think we landed at like 48. And they were just like, what happened? We invested more in this launch than we've ever invested before. And, this is kind of when I was a bit new. So I hadn't asked for their data going into my first launch with them. And so I said, well, let's look at the numbers from before. Let's see how we compared to last year, how we compared, to the year before. Cause I thought, okay, well, I need to know, are we like half of last year, 10%, maybe then I can figure things out. Well, come to find out, not only. So their goal had been 100 new enrollments every single year. First of all, they had never, ever gotten 100 new enrollments. So it's like, okay, ding, ding, ding. Like, I don't know if you didn't get that the first time launching right out of the gate, what made you think you were going to get it now? Second, they had actually never gotten more than like 36. Now they thought their tops was 77 because they did have a year where they enrolled 77 people, but those extra 40 people didn't pay to get in. So I had to be the bearer of bad news and say, well, those people don't count. Oh, but they count. No, they don't. Because they didn't give you money, right? We need to base our goals on who has given this amount of money to be in this thing. But then, so those were the first two things, right? One, they had never achieved 100. Two, they had never even had more than say like 35, maybe 40 people who had paid at any given time. And then the third factor, which I thought was like even bigger, was that they had been increasing the cost year over year, right? Because last year they didn't get it at the price they wanted. So then they were like increasing the cost so that they would meet their financial goals, even if they didn't meet the enrollment goals. But, I had to be the bearer of bad news and just say like, you guys, your goals are totally off. Like you're setting a standard for success that doesn't make any sense. And what I should add also is their audience size had not increased in those 3 years. So it's not even like they were adding new people to the pipeline. I mean, it was flawed from the get-go. And the strategy maybe not flawed, right? But the goals, the goalposts were totally in the wrong spot. So I think that's an area where, if we had just sat there and focused on what we said during the webinars or what the email copy was. We could have twisted ourselves inside out and rewritten copy 6 ways from Sunday. It doesn't change the fact that they had no reason to even think that they would get 100 new enrollments.
Right.
Even though that's what they were setting as their measurement of success. So we look at the plan, we look at the environment, we look at the execution. How do you look at all the things we've talked about, Gwen, and figure out what actually is wrong.
That's where the magic comes. And I'd love to say that there's a formula. There is so not a formula. And often it's a bit of trial and error. I'd love to say that, all you have to do is, but it's just not that way. It really is looking at all of the elements and saying, where do things actually feel off, right? Yeah, the example you just gave, the execution was not the problem. But there are times when it's like, oh, no, the execution was also part of the problem. The copy wasn't going out consistently. It was poorly written. It was, it can be any of the pieces of the equation. But I think the trick is being willing to put everything on the chopping block. Everything is being looked at and being considered. And realizing in some cases, it really has nothing to do with you. It has to do with timing, space, environment, and things that you couldn't control. Before we got on the recording, we talked about that, there were really bad strategies and execution that was working also soon after COVID hit because people had ridiculous free money that they didn't know what to do with. Right.
Yeah.
And so it isn't, there are all sorts of things. And of course, that's one of those examples. If you were using really bad tactics and strategy when people were freely giving money, you may think that, I've got this great business. And then all of a sudden it's like, none of the stuff is working. It's like, well, yeah, technically none of it should have ever worked.
Right.
Right. So we're basing information on faulty data. Right. So it really is, analyzing it and saying, what can we do? And so that's where you have to decide, am I going to wholesale change or am I going to tweak and adjust? Right. Or am I doing something in between? And so thinking about, and it's truly a benefit kind of analysis of what's the cost doing the wholesale change versus what's the cost of doing the tweak. Usually the tweak is easier, but sometimes it's not, because we need quicker response, and the tweak is going to make the adjustment, but it's going to take longer, right? So there's so many factors that go into it to see, what really needs to happen, what actually has to change. The example I was giving earlier, where they had made a business model shift, we realized that it was more of a panic mode that she kind of went back to like, oh, I'm gonna make a big shift. And it was like, no, that was actually just a panic mode. That wasn't actually helpful in making the big shift. What we needed to do was actually look at why it wasn't working and make the tweak. Well, now we're making the tweak and all of a sudden things are going better. And part of it was time. It's like, oh, we're not seeing it fit. We're not seeing the change fast enough. It's like, yeah, but you knew this was going to take time. This was not we're going to make this change and poof, we're going to see results, in 30 days. We knew that this was a longer play. And so that it's one of those things, you've got to look at all of those factors and say what actually needs to be done. But there's other times that it's like, no, you need to make a wholesale change because this just is not working at all.
Yeah. And I think, part of what you're talking about as, kind of going through to make your diagnosis is you do have to separate your symptoms from your cause. You're the person who's always going, okay, but is that the root cause? Like, let's dig a little deeper, because it might be, right? But
it can be.
It might not be. And a lot of times, the thing that emerges as the most painful or most acute just isn't the actual reason. Then you kind of go forward into what you were saying and, make this plan of like, how do you get out of here? Like, what's next? Assuming you're not going to close down your business, right? Like, and take your toys and go home, right? There's got to be a what's next. And like you said, you can decide, do you scrap the whole thing and try something new? Do you make some tweaks? Where do you think, because I think that is definitely great first advice, but I also think there's something about expectations. Like, how do you recalibrate your expectations when you're disappointed. Because I think at the very least, even if you're not crushed and like wanting to quit everything, it's fair to be disappointed by poor results.
Oh, yeah. Been there, done that how many times since you and I've worked together? Like, that happens a lot. And I think part of it is understanding that's part of what you signed up for as an entrepreneur. That's part of it. Because if you wanted the, what I'll call the steady satisfaction, that's what a job is. Right? I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into work and I'm going to do these things and I'm going to get paid and I'm going to, da.
Right.
Right. And, not that every job is fabulous, but most people, if they work at it a tiny bit, can actually find a job that's actually pretty fabulous if it comes down to it. But the disappointment, the taking the risk, the trying something new and having it not work is also part of the other side of the coin of having it work in an amazing way and go, oh my gosh, this is amazing this way, because it wouldn't be amazing if it worked every time.
Right.
Right. And so part of it is just saying, okay, so this is what it is. And, one of my clients this was an issue because she has things where she's worked really, really hard and things completely out of her control. The deal falls through. Okay. Completely out of her control. Did everything right. The execution was right. The strategy, the goal, all of it was right. Still falls through. And what she found is that, before we were working together, that would devastate her for extended periods of time. And what we talked about, and she's made fabulous progress because we were just talking about this like a few weeks ago, was she now gives herself permission to say, I'm done for the rest of this day. I'm just done. And call it for a day, but not for a week or a month or an extended period. It's just like, okay, this has taken all of my energy today, but I'm going to come back tomorrow and I'm going to look at it with fresh eyes and I'm going to figure out what needs to be done. And in some cases, like in her case, it's done. So what she needs to do is find the next deal. Right. But she knows that she doesn't have the energy to find that next deal today because today sucked. Okay.
Yeah.
And so now where, when she's having that, she'll give herself a half a day and not beat herself up about it. But she doesn't lose an entire week.
Right.
And I think that has to be part of it, is it's okay that we failed.
So what do you think, or maybe it's not different, right? But I was going to say, what do you think you need to do if you have a team? Like, how do you talk to the team about a failure? Because so many times when we're running toward a big goal, we have enrolled everybody in the organization.
I think it's important, to be as, I'll say, reasonably transparent as you can be. Not everything makes sense for everybody to know. Let's be honest about that. But to say this, I was expecting this outcome. This is not what happened. If there's places that there are rooms for improvement or things that need to be done, be clear and say, it really appears that X, Y, and Z were issues, that we didn't do it well. We need to do it better. You work on fixing that. But it's also important to say, as far as I can tell, we did everything right and it still went to hell. There we are.
Yeah.
Right. And just owning it in a very, honest and straightforward way and saying, sometimes this is what happens.
Yeah. And I think, if you're running a traditional organization, most people care about job security more than anything, right? And so I was reading something on LinkedIn where it said it is never ethical for an employer to promise job security in this market. But I think you can be honest on whether, this is not an outcome that was completely beyond the realm of possibility. So, we had contingency plans, or this is really shocking. So we're going to recalibrate and we'll let you know how that affects you.
Yep.
I think the biggest mistake that we make is when we want to lie and we want to act like something was more successful than it was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because that never, ever, ever goes well.
Well, and quite honestly, the other is also true, where we act like it was less successful than it actually was. Right. Because there's things like, oh yeah, oh my gosh, it just didn't do anything that we wanted it to do. And it's like, well, no, actually, going the example that you had, it's like, no, you didn't hit 100, but you hit 48. That was actually better than you've ever hit before.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of beating people up, in the like, oh, it didn't do what we needed it to do and all of that, to say, yeah, we had a really outrageous goal and we came nowhere near it, but we actually did better than we've ever done. So let's figure out how we can leverage that to do better next time again.
Right. I mean, so ultimately it's like, you just have to right size the expectations and right size your evaluation of how things went.
Yep.
Because I want to bring us back to kind of what you said at the beginning, Gwen. It's like, it is impossible to be a business owner, to be an entrepreneur, and have everything go right all the time.
Yeah, it's not the nature of it. It's absolutely not the nature of it. And if it is, then something weird is happening. I mean, I've never come across any entrepreneur at any level, highly successful or not, that hasn't had these kinds of issues at some point in time.
Yeah. So ultimately, what you need to do if you're listening and something goes sideways, I mean, this is one of those episodes where I say bookmark it and listen to it every time something fails to meet your expectations as a good reminder. But the first thing you want to remind yourself is, effort and effectiveness are not the same thing. Just because it didn't go well does not mean you didn't work hard. It does not mean that you didn't do everything you knew how to do, right? Nobody, least of all us, is questioning your work ethic or how much you wanted it, right? Because that's the other thing we'll hear is like, well, if you wanted it bad enough, you would have been successful, blah, blah, blah. That's not always the case. Second thing is, take a look. Almost always the answers will lie in one of three places. Take a look at your plan. Take a look at the environment. What's going on around you in the world. Is any of that potentially a factor into what happened? And then, and only then, look at your execution. Did you follow the plan like you said you would, like you expected to consistently? And once you look at all those things, separate the symptoms from the causes. That's often a place where you do need outside perspective because, especially if it's a plan of your own making, it's very easy to mix everything all up into one single thing.
Yep.
Be honest as you plan to move forward. The big decision is, do I scrap everything and throw this whole, do I throw the baby out with the bathwater? Start over. Do I make some tweaks? What makes sense? Because your circumstances and my circumstances, even if we launched the same general thing at the same time, will be very different. I might need to scrap my plan while you might need to just make a couple of tweaks. And finally, on the note of outside perspective, I think part of it is getting good at reflection, Gwen. Because that's what I think is sometimes we don't actually take the time to reflect until something doesn't go according to plan. We tend to only be reflective when we're looking at what went wrong. We tend to not really reflect much when we want to think of what went right? We just we're like, woohoo, riding the high and moving forward.
Yep.
So if you're listening and this has given you something to think about and you're like, oh, maybe I do need to spend a little bit more time with reflection, or I would love to spend more time on reflection. I just don't know what to reflect on. Tell me what to reflect on and I'll do it. Well, we've got something for you, which is this great email that Gwen sends out once a week with just one question. It's one reflection question, probably takes you 3 to 5 minutes to think of, unless you're a really deep thinker. There's not advice in there. There's not a whole bunch of if this, then that overwhelm. Just a prompt that helps you get into that CEO strategic brain for a little bit of time each week and exercise that muscle, right? Because so much of being good at business and being good at business strategy is putting the reps in. And so if that's something that you are looking to do right now in 2026, or whenever you happen to be listening to this, sign up at everydayeffectiveness.com/question. Just fill out a couple of questions right there, and you'll be getting that on the next Friday. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tonya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.